Is Israeli society perfect? Absolutely not. But at its core, it is far more perfect and far better to be desired than the evil of Iran, the evil of Hamas. We all were overwhelmed at the atrocities of October the 7th, and we recoiled in horror as we wrapped our brains around the fact that over 1,200 people had been brutally murdered. But what I want us to look at for a few moments today is the post-October 7th world, specifically in America, and how is it that evil is finding a place of refuge in the midst of American society. My name is Robert Stearns, and I have had the privilege of leading tens of thousands of people to Israel. I've been through the checkpoints. I've been in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. I know firsthand so many of the people in these situations, both on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. So let's talk about this as we try to understand what's happening in our world today. Hamas, October 7th, shocking, horrifying. But how is it that now on American soil, how do we understand that average and even privileged Americans are actually now justifying and defending these acts of terrorism? How is this possible? So to understand this, we've got to pull back the curtain and we have to look into the question of worldview. Now, worldview is something we kind of, like, you don't really think about it, right? Like, you don't think about breathing. There's plenty of things in life. You don't think about blinking your eyes. These are automatic responses. Well, you have a worldview, whether you realize you have one or not. You live in a construct, in a worldview, whether you understand that you're living in one or not. In the words of the Jewish prophet Bob Dylan said, you gotta serve somebody. So the minute that you feel that something is fair or unfair, or you think it's just or unjust or right or wrong, you have established what your worldview is. The minute you make a decision on a candidate to vote for or a charity to donate to, you have expressed an understanding of your worldview. So the worldview of Hamas, which is backed and fueled by Iran, is a worldview of totalitarian Islam. They are working, please understand, there is no question. They are an evil empire bent on one thing: the restoration of radical Muslim Sharia domination all over the world. This is who they are. This is what they are after, what they are going for. But how is it possible? How is it possible that this worldview that denies the rights of women, executes gays, has no place of freedom whatsoever? How is it possible that on American university campuses, their proxies vis-a-vis Hamas are being defended? That's what we've got to look into today. And let me say this as we start out. This is not about America is perfect or Israel is perfect. That's not what we're talking about. There are no perfect societies. There is no perfect war. There is no perfect country. There are no perfect politicians. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the root, the core of belief systems. So at the core of the belief system of Iran is unapologetically, clearly, murder and dominate the non-believer. Anyone who does not subscribe to Sharia Islam. You have the morality police beating young girls to death because they don't properly wear the hijab. You have child brides at age 12 and 13 being given in marriage to middle-aged men. This is the reality of what happens under Sharia law in Iran. This is the real thing. That's the core of the society. Versus Israeli society, the core of which is freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom for all minorities, equal rights for all citizens under the law, freedom for social minorities, ethnic minorities, and the list goes on and on. Is Israeli society perfect? Absolutely not. But at its core, it is far more perfect and far better to be desired than the evil of Iran, the evil of Hamas. That has to be what we understand as our starting point. Now let's dive into this today. So what I want to lay out for us is three core worldviews, okay? And actually we talked about this in the book, No, We Can't. No, We Can't. Radical Islam, Militant Secularism, and the Myth of Coexistence. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about radical Islam, based in Iran, operating through Hamas. We're talking about a Judeo-Christian worldview, which is present in Israel, America, and the West. Again, not perfect societies, but better societies than Iran. And then you're talking about an atheistic or a postmodern worldview, which is what we are now seeing chipping away at the foundations of America. We're seeing this in the universities. We're seeing this now even in Congress. We're seeing this absolute postmodern worldview. Let's understand, what is this postmodern ideology? Postmodern ideology understands suffering not as a consequence of a broken world, not as something that is just part of life. Have you suffered? I've suffered. I think everybody suffers. I know very few people who get through life without some kind of suffering. But in a postmodern worldview, suffering is not just a part of life. Suffering is not a consequence of sin or fallenness or evil. Suffering is an injustice. And it's an injustice primarily viewed through the lens, listen, of oppressed versus oppressor. Powerless versus powerful. And so any suffering in a postmodern worldview immediately goes to not what is the cause of my suffering. Now answer me this question. How many times have you been the cause of your own suffering? I know I have been the cause of a huge amount of the suffering in my life. When I make bad choices in my life, there's consequences for it. If I'm not eating right, if I'm not caring for myself, if I'm not being healthy, I'm going to have a consequence to pay in my health. Is that because I've been oppressed by some? No, it's because I made choices. It's because I made choices. Postmodernism removes the autonomy of the individual, which also removes the dignity of the individual as a volitional being to make choices. And it reduces everything to the powerful and the powerless, the oppressors and the oppressed. And so suffering has a single cause, the power of others. There's no discussion, there's no question of, could I possibly have had something to do with my suffering? Those who are perceived to be the oppressors must be brought to justice for causing the suffering of the oppressed. Human power is therefore understood to be the primary force in the world, not God, not natural law, not moral absolutes. And if you don't have power, you obviously deserve to get power. And so it's all about destabilizing power structures. And so people are automatically divided into these two camps, the powerful and the powerless, the oppressed and the oppressors. And so this is what happens when we look at American society, when we look at what's happening on American campuses, and why, unbelievably, privileged Americans are somehow absolutely misreading this situation and coming into collusion with evil. There is an unholy alliance that has emerged. There is an evil alliance that has been forged. And the vast majority of these American, many of them young people, not all, I don't even think they understand what they're doing. They feel that it is morally good because they feel like they're speaking up for the underdog. But if the underdog is coming with a suicide belt wrapped around them, if the underdog is coming not to coexist, not to give dignity to the other, but to destroy the other, then you're in the wrong camp. We will never truly understand what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in Western society if we don't understand that it's a battle of three worldviews. It is radical Islam, which is primarily now based in Iran, of course, Qatar, other places as well, and has bases, has embassies all around the world. You can come across America right now, and there are radical Islamists in this nation. Now, there are millions of peaceful Muslims in this nation. I have a dear friend who lives right down the road from me in Grand Island. Dear Muslim friend, I wonderfully enjoy my times of fellowship and lunch. We go out to lunch. We go to a halal restaurant together, etc. And he shares with me how scared and nervous he is about the increase of radicalized Islam in America. That's the first worldview. The second worldview is the Judeo-Christian worldview that gives dignity to every individual, that gives the power of choice and free will to every individual, and then says the choices you make will have consequences, and you'll have to live with those consequences. And then the third worldview, if you want to call it secularism, atheism, postmodernism, they're all at the root the same, which essentially says, I'm a victim, and I'm a victim of the powerful. I'm a victim of the oppressors. And I have an entitlement to destabilize everything because that's the path towards what? I don't know. Because what exactly is your plan for the future? I see a lot of destruction. I don't see much do we want to live like they're living in Iran right now? Do you understand what these societies are like? The Bible says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness. We wrestle against strongholds in the mind. These are the three primary houses that are at work on the world stage right now. The Judeo-Christian house, the house of the Lord, it's not perfect. It's not perfect because we're fallen human beings. But thank God it is the house that allows for the dignity of every individual. The dignity of the Buddhist, the Hindu, the Muslim, the trans person, the gay person, every single person, every single human being created in the image of God, worthy of dignity and worthy of safety. Not necessarily worthy of agreement. That doesn't mean I agree with every individual, with every viewpoint, but they are worthy of living a life of their volition, of their choice in safety, in peace. The Judeo-Christian worldview, the radical Islamic worldview we've talked about. And number three, this postmodern worldview, oppressed versus oppressor, powerful versus powerless. Begin to understand today that this is the spiritual battle that we are engaged in. Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood this. He understood the need to take a stand. And today, God is raising up watchmen on the wall all around the world. God is raising up those who have a discerning heart and who understand in this hour the need to come into the house of the Lord, to come into the knowledge of God, and to stand firm in that place of scriptural foundation, of standing in the goodness of God, and an offering peace, and offering coexistence. Do you know what? In the Garden of Eden, God gave free will. God gave choice. God always gives his people choices. And we walk with the consequences of those choices. Understand these three worldviews. Understand that they're impacting our world today. Get informed and get involved. I'll see you the next time.